Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Chantel and today I am going to be doing the thing that I have been threatening to do for months and months and months now, and that is to make a video talking a little bit more in depth about the Witcher series by Andrzej Sapkowski. So I finally finished reading the most recent addition to this series, which is the prequel novel, Crossroads of Ravens, which means I've now read all of the Witcher books that are in existence right now, and I would like to talk a little bit about them and what I like about them, what compels me, and why I find Sapkowski's writing and characterization and world building to be as good as they are, because I think they are quite good, and I really quite like this series. So, as well as his thematic concerns. So that's what we're going to do today. Well, we're going to talk a little bit about The Witcher and why I think it's great. I wish the Netflix show was better. But the books are great, and also I think the video games are quite good. So let's talk about it, right? So if we're not aware, at this point I think The Witcher is pretty big in the English-speaking world, even though it's only been relatively recently that it's become super popular in the English-speaking world. But if you're not aware, The Witcher series of books is a series of sort of dark fantasy novels written by Andrzej Sapkowski, who is Polish, and they're originally written in Polish for a Polish-speaking audience, and they're about a witcher. A witcher is a professional monster hunter who is also himself been mutated through various means, magical and scientific, in order to make them really good at hunting monsters. And the Witcher series follows a particular Witcher called Geralt of Rivia as he does that, and also gets himself involved in much bigger events in world history, and finds himself tangled up with destiny in various interesting ways. And that is the basic premise of the Witcher series. So the Witcher series thus far consists of 9 books total. There's the 5 core Witcher novels, which constitute the Witcher saga, which is the main story of Geralt and Ciri and Yennefer. And they need to be read as a group in order, those 5. There are also 2 collections of short stories that are, generally speaking, intended to be read before you embark on the main Witcher saga. And then there are 2 prequel novels, which can be read probably at any time, but honestly, I think generally publication order is the best way to do it. So I would read So personally, my recommended reading order for the Witcher books would be to read the 2 short story collections, beginning with The Last Wish, and the other one is Sword of Destiny. I have all my books right here. I can show them all, I guess. So The Last Wish and Sword of Destiny are the 2 short story collections, which are recommended. I would recommend you read them first, because they really introduce you to all of the main characters that will be important in the main Witcher saga. Then we have the 5 books that constitute the Witcher saga. So that is Blood of Elves, The Time of Contempt, Baptism of Fire, The Tower of Swallows, and The Lady of the Lake. And these are the 5 main Witcher novels in the series. And then we have the 2 prequels. So we have Season of Storms and most recently Crossroads of Ravens. This was published just in the fall of 2025, so it's still pretty new. So that is what we have, at least right now. Andrzej Sapkowski has said that, he does not preclude the possibility of writing more stories in this world and with Geralt as a main character. So it's very possible that there will be still more coming in the future. However, he has said that there will be no stories of Geralt set after the main Witcher saga. So after the main 5 books in the Witcher saga, The Lady of the Lake, chronologically, there are no more Geralt stories for him to tell. I think he's pretty adamant about that in interviews. So I guarantee you that probably what we're going to be getting in future is more prequels, right? And maybe more short story collections. I would love more short story collections, quite frankly. I really, really like the short story collections in the Witcher books. So anyway, that's a little overview of the series itself. Yeah. Now, I want to talk a little bit about some of the thematic concerns that I think Sapkowski is working with here, because he is dealing with a lot of really interesting thematic ideas. And I think this is something that some people do kind of find off-putting, especially about the main 5 novels in the series. I think most people really, really like the short stories. The short stories are quite good. Many of them are very directly commenting upon or are sort of dark retellings of familiar fairy tales, and I think that's really appealing, and it appeals to me as well. I also quite like all the short stories. But I think there's a couple of things that tend to put people off from the main sort of 5-book saga. And one of those things, I think, is just that it is rather meandering in its plot. If what you're looking for is something that is really tightly plotted and very action heavy, that is not what you're going to get so much from the main 5-book saga, because Sapkowski really is more interested in exploring ideas around morality, around legend and myth and history, and how those things interact with each other, and how history becomes transformed into legends and myths. He's also really interested in ideas of like destiny versus free will, and the struggle or the ways in which those two things can kind of maybe come into conflict with each other potentially. And it's also very, I would say, character driven in a lot of ways. So if what you're looking for is something that's very tightly plotted and that is very tight and action-packed and moves very quickly from one event to the next, you may very well be disappointed by especially the main 5 Witcher saga novels, because that's not really what is going on here. It's definitely a much slower experience. I hesitate to compare him to Robin Hobb, because I feel like I compare everybody to Robin Hobb, but like in terms of the way that he writes as being very character driven and being very much in the heads of the characters, I think that's a fair comparison to make. So yeah, that's how I feel about it, especially when you get to the last couple of books in the series, and especially when you get to The Lady of the Lake, which, as you can see, is relatively hefty in length, especially compared to the others in the series. There's a lot going on, and Geralt sometimes takes a back seat in in this book to other things, other concerns, other characters, especially to Ciri. Ciri's obviously also very important. She's basically the deuteragonist of this series, and she really does sort of take the front seat in a lot of Lady of the Lake for good reason, right? She's a very important character. But yeah, if you're here just for Geralt, then you might not have as good a time with this book. Personally, I really like it, mostly because, again, I think Sapkowski's thematic explorations are exactly the kinds of things that I like in fiction. They're exactly the kinds of things that I like to see explored in fiction, particularly, again, ideas about, like, legends and the cyclical nature of time and cross-pollination between universes and the ways that legends develop over time, and the ways that people can become themselves part of bigger legends and bigger stories, whether they know it or not. I think it's really interesting, and I really, really like that about these books. It's one of my favorite things about these books. But it's true that, like, the other favorite thing that I have about these books is Geralt himself. Geralt himself is a really fascinating character. I know a lot of people really like to take his speech from, it's literally the story called The Lesser Evil, and it's the big speech that Geralt makes. If you've watched the Netflix show, you've seen him, you saw this speech quoted word for word, straight from the book, actually, where he talks about greater evil and lesser evil and the neutral path and whatnot. And I think a lot of people do sort of take the idea of quote-unquote neutrality, moral neutrality, as sort of kind of gospel for Geralt's character, but that's really not what's going on there. And Geralt is actually, like, in terms of his character and his personality, and the reason why I like him so much as a character is because he actually is just a genuinely good guy, and he actually genuinely tries to do the right thing as often as possible. He likes to make big speeches about how he stays neutral and how his code prevents him from taking sides or whatever, but he actually is, like, constantly sort of works against that, like, in the actual actions that he takes, right? He is actually always taking sides, and that's kind of a key part of his character, and that's a major part of who he is right from the very beginning, is that he does try to do the right thing as often as possible. It often comes back to bite him in the ass later, because he's a good guy in a really cynical, grimdark kind of world where doing the right thing often is kind of impossible, and there often are no good choices, but he does choose. Relatively often, very often, in fact, he does make the choice. And yeah, again, sometimes it leads to very disastrous results, but ultimately he is always trying his best, and I really like that about Geralt. He is one of my favorite himbos in all of literature. He's great. Yeah, he's definitely a bit of a himbo, but that's why I love him. The other characters in this series are also excellent. I cannot let any discussion of this series go by without talking about Ciri, who is Geralt's, like, the shortest answer to what Ciri is to Geralt is she's basically his adopted daughter. And I'm a sucker for a father-daughter relationship, especially one that isn't based in blood, one that is based on other things, other connections, a found family, if you will. And Ciri is a really great character in and of herself. She is smart, she's headstrong, she's impetuous, she's definitely very much a child when we first are introduced to her, but she grows up significantly over the course of the series, and I love that about characters like her. She deals with some very, very traumatic events that and things that happen to her in very, I think, interesting and relatable and realistic ways that make her very, very easy to root for as a character, even when she's doing bad things, because she does do bad things. She is, like all the characters in these books, she's very flawed, right? Like, Geralt is also a very flawed character. Everybody in the series is deeply flawed, and Ciri is no exception. She has very sort of trauma-informed responses to the things that happen to her, and I love her. There's also Yennefer of Vengerberg, who is Geralt's lover. She's a powerful sorceress, and she's also an amazing character. She's very ruthless and ambitious, but she also loves very deeply and is very passionate, and she would do anything to protect Geralt and to protect Ciri, and I also love that about a character who is, again, deeply flawed, and she's deeply personally ambitious, and she is operating as a powerful woman in a world that is, you know, deeply steeped in misogyny, and she reacts to that accordingly, and I really like that about her. She is a fantastic character, and it's just very fun, the relationship dynamic that she has with Geralt, which they're very messy, right? She and Geralt's relationship is very, very messy. They're two very, very broken people who love each other, but both of whom have a really, really hard time admitting it to each other for various reasons that are personal to both of them, and the course of their relationship is very rocky, but it feels very real in the sense that, again, the way that they deal with each other and the way that they feel about each other feels very emotionally realistic, right? And I really love that about them and their relationship. And yeah, Yennefer of Vengerberg is one of my favorite. Again, these are all some of my favorite characters in fantasy literature. They're amazing. And then, of course, there's Dandelion, who is Geralt's best buddy, and he is a renowned bard and singer and poet, and he's an amazing foil to Geralt. He's so funny. When they are together and they're having just adventures together, it's like it's often very comedic when they're together, and they're very funny. It's very sort of buddy cop kind of situations where, you know, Dandelion will get himself into trouble, Geralt will have to get him out of it, or vice versa. Sometimes it's Geralt getting into trouble and Dandelion has to find a way to get Geralt out. But I appreciate, you know, Dandelion is often very insufferable, and I think that's deliberate. Again, like, these are all very flawed characters, right? But, and even Geralt admits that he's often very insufferable, but he has, you know, a deep-seated loyalty to Geralt. He would do anything for Geralt, and Geralt would do just about anything for him. And I appreciate that in characters, right? That kind of loyalty, that kind of bravery, because Dandelion is not a very brave person. He is often very cowardly, but when it comes to Geralt, he will find reserves of bravery within himself that sometimes surprises even him, I think. And that is a really great dynamic as well. And yeah, the dynamics between all of these characters, between Geralt and Dandelion and Ciri and Yennefer, all four of these characters have just an amazing sort of vibe in whatever combination they find themselves in the over the course of these books and in these stories. And that is a big part of what keeps me coming back to this series over and over and over again, because those characters are just so great. And the world building, I feel like, in The Witcher is also incredibly deep and incredibly detailed in a way that makes the world feel even bigger than it actually is, and in a way that I think is rare for me to find in fantasy fiction. There's a lot of fantasy fiction that does a good job of world building, don't get me wrong, but there's something, in some ways it's very Tolkienian about the world building in the Witcher series that makes it feel like there are even more unexplored depths to be plumbed that we're only scratching the surface of when we read these books. And that reminds me a little bit of how I feel when I read Tolkien, right? When I read The Lord of the Rings. When you read The Lord of the Rings, you can feel the weight of all of the history of Middle-earth behind that narrative. Even if you're not actually familiar with it, you can sense that it's there, even when it doesn't really exist, right? Because Tolkien didn't write everything that he didn't actually write out everything that he alludes to. He sketched out a lot of it, but there's obviously, like, again, it's more of a feeling or a vibe than it is like an actual thing that exists. It just feels that way when you read it. I get the same feeling when I'm reading Realm of the Elderlings, or I feel like there's many unplumbed depths. But even that doesn't quite do it, because again, there's fewer references that just sort of go unacknowledged, or that are just not elaborated upon, right? So you get a lot of, in the Witcher books, you get a lot of characters referring to things that are either going on or that have happened in the past, and then not elaborating on those references in ways that, again, make it feel very real and very much like this is a real lived-in world. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why it's so fun to keep coming back to the world, because you can keep finding new things all the time in it. And having that background also, I think, helps a lot with the video games too, because it makes the video games feel much deeper even than they actually are, and much larger than they actually are. So that's a big draw for me as well. And Andrzej Sapkowski's writing is also quite excellent. Obviously, I have not read him in the original Polish. I do not speak or read Polish, so I've only read him in English translations, most of which are translated by, I think there's a couple of different translators for some of these. Yeah, like The Last Wish, Stories in the Last Wish are translated by Danusia Stock. We've got Lady of the Lake, and many of the other novels are translated by David French. So there's a couple of different translators, but I really like the snappiness of Sapkowski's prose. I like the incredibly dry sense of humor that he has. They're often very funny. And the quality of the prose, I think, is quite nice, and it often can and does take on a very poetic quality to it. So I do quite like that as well. So yeah, it's a good time. That is, I would say, my overview of the Witcher book series. And again, I'm not a huge fan of the Netflix show, but I have watched the first couple seasons of it. I thought the first season was the best, frankly, and then it just kind of went downhill from there. But I do quite like the games. I've played all 3 of the games from CD Projekt Red, and I do quite like them. I'm very excited for the remake of the first Witcher game that is in the works, I believe, as well as, of course, they're also working on The Witcher 4, which is going to be, I believe Ciri is going to be the playable protagonist of The Witcher 4, which is very exciting. I am very much looking forward to that. So yeah, I think if you're at all into video games, I do strongly recommend the video games of The Witcher. Again, the world is quite detailed, and the writing is pretty excellent in all of them, but especially in the third one. And the choices are very reflective of the kinds of choices that Geralt has to make in the books. It feels like they're often very difficult choices. They're often choices that don't really have any truly good outcomes. They are RPGs, so you are making decisions as Geralt, and you can make different decisions in different playthroughs, and quite enjoyable, quite fun games. So yeah, that's my overview of the Witcher series. Let's talk about them. Let me know in the comments below what you think about the Witcher books, if you've read them, if you agree with me, disagree with me, whatever. Let's, be nice to each other. Don't be rude. Let's talk. And yeah, if you like this video, give it a like, subscribe if you'd like to see more, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.